So this is a real treat for me to get a chance to meet with Kathy and to spend some time. So let me tell you a little bit about Kathy. Kathy, as Dr. Lucy mentioned, is an alumni of what used to be Dominican College and is now Dominican University. And in fact, in 1996-ish, she was Alumni of the Year, meaning voted or nominated as one of the true stars among the alumni from years ago. We won't mention how many years, but at least 5.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. After Dominican College, she took out a stint in the Peace Corps, and then one of her earliest jobs was working with an organization called the Nature Company, which eventually got took over by Discovery.
By Discovery Channel.
By Discovery Channel, which some of you may be familiar with it. But the Nature Company sold nature-related products like stuffed bears and you can say a little more.
Everything from telescopes to minerals to great books, art, everything to basically our mission was to turn people on to nature.
Yes, and one of the earlier green-related concepts in business. And then from there, she was there for about 13 years in 2 different stints, and from there became president and then eventually CEO, or was it immediately president and CEO?
Eventually.
Yeah, president and then CEO of Smith Hawkins. Some of you may be familiar with Smith Hawkins. It was an upscale gardening company that sells gardening supplies, and they had as many as 44 stores?
Yes.
Starting from much fewer when you got there,
right.
Grew to 44 stores. So she's had the experience of taking a small company, much like a startup that had a few retail operations, and growing it to Smith & Hawkins, which was quite famous and one of the largest in the industry. And then from there, was in a consulting gig for a couple of years, running a consulting firm, Fitch North America, and then became CEO of Sur La Table. And for those of you who are not familiar with Sur La Table, it is a upscale kitchen cookery product company. I think the number 2 in the industry.
Yes.
Second largest.
Second largest, only to Williams-Sonoma.
Williams-Sonoma, which you've probably seen in malls throughout the country, and you've probably seen Sur La Table. So she's been a CEO thrice over and knows a lot about leadership. And so what I'm here to do is to learn more just from your perspective about it. And I'd love to start with a question that I have for you. You mentioned in your bio that I read that you did a climb at Kilimanjaro, and you said something about learning something about business and leadership from that.
Yeah, you all know where Mount Kilimanjaro is in Africa. It's the highest mountain there. And I had this just passion to climb mountains from the time I was very young. And I actually had a little break between Smith & Hawkins and the consulting, and so I said to my sister, let's go climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And she goes, okay. That's about how much preparation we did. But the way you climb is with guides. It's very carefully controlled by the government. You cannot climb on your own. And so we have these wonderful native people from around the mountain, and we became very close friends with them walking up the mountain. And they taught me this thing called pole pole, which means slow, slow. And most people don't make it to the top of the mountain because there's this huge elevation change and you can't adjust to the lack of oxygen. And they've learned over the years that it's a slow, steady climb to get to the top. And so when I got out of off the mountain, I ended up taking this job at Sur La Table, and I could see that there were just innumerable problems that had to be resolved. And so I started kind of introducing this concept of we'll go slowly and we'll get to the top, and it actually was a great metaphor to talk about how you have to kind of pick your way through all the minefields of problems that exist in companies, or at least in the companies I've worked in.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to take you back to earlier on in your life. Did you ever have a sense that you would be a CEO? Was that kind of in the master plan for you? Or how did you arrive to that?
No, is the answer. And I get asked that question a lot, particularly by young women who come to me and they go, I want to do what you did. How do I do exactly what you did? And my answer is always, you know, different time for me. I was very, very fortunate in meeting lots of different people along the way that mentored me and helped me. And also I just think that I had this desire to learn and to be curious. And the thing I worry the most about young people today in business is that you want to get into this track and make a lot of money and go to the top. And for me, it was never like that. I was very curious about all the aspects of business, and so I never was like satisfied just doing one thing. And that's really what led me from, you know, starting out doing one thing and then raising my hand. I actually ran a distribution center through a union takeover bid one time, which wasn't the highlight of my career. But it was all those things that kind of came together that led me to become a leader. And I was always a really bossy little kid, though, I have to say. I was always the person on the playground who said, "We're playing kickball today."
Yeah.
So I probably had that gene that, you know, I don't know where that comes from. But no, I never really started out or set out to do that. But once I started to do it, I really enjoy working with people, and I love the kind of companies that I work for. So it felt very natural after I kind of got my rhythm and started to go.
Yeah. It reminds me of something I think the leaders that I talked about with you all about the book, that a lot of them, the great leaders, were not ambitious to become a leader. They were ambitious about something, but it wasn't the role. It was, I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to add value, and then leadership naturally just kind of came toward them.
Right, and I mean, the other thing that was really fortunate, or that I was really fortunate for, was I've always worked in companies I really believed in.
Yeah.
So I love nature. I'm an environmentalist. I grew up in Berkeley. There was a real connection to the mission statement for that company, and that goes a long ways for me. Gardening, I was an avid gardener. I mean, it was like I was the kid in a candy store at Smith Hawkins. I mean, I couldn't believe I actually had the opportunity to manage this business that I was such a fan of. And you know, so it goes. I think that it's really, you work hard. I mean, there is no substitute for long hours, hard work, a lot of stress in certain situations. But if you love what you do and if you believe in it, it's easier. I'll just tell you one little sidebar, though. The same year that I took off the sabbatical, I took a sabbatical between Smith & Hawkins and Sur La Table, and I went to India. I'd always wanted to go to India, and I was, you know, traveling around, just going from one place to the next, and it was the first time in my life where I went, I don't think I could fix this country. You know, it's like, that's how my mind works. It's like, I like to fix things. And I think it's a quality that kind of, you know, made being the CEO work for me. Is like, I love to solve problems and fix things.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, wow, there's a lot of stuff here that has to change, but it's going to take, you know, a fair amount of time to do it.
And I'm also hearing, when you said as a kid you were comfortable bossing, that translates for me, comfortable in your own authority.
Yeah. Always. I think. I mean, it's hard to remember exactly. You know, you kind of rewrite history, I think, a little bit.
I'm sure.
You know, when you're all of a sudden you're the CEO, you go, how did I get here? Oh, that's how I got here. But I mean, you asked me in preparation for this, like, who influenced me, and my dad was amazing. He was such a deep river, and he was so calm. And, you know, there were 5 kids in our family, and it was pretty chaotic all the time. And I think that subliminally, I realized that, you know, you can get a lot of things done by just focusing and being calm. And that has helped me a lot through a lot of the you know, challenges that have, you know, been presented through various businesses.
I'll bet. I don't know exactly that this is true, but I'm pretty certain that most great leaders, they either followed the model of one of their parents or rebelled against the model of one of their parents,
right,
and found their own rhythm.
Well, my father wanted me to be a teacher. I think that was his goal for his 4 daughters. And honestly, I tried it, and I wasn't that excited about it. I loved the Peace Corps experience, which was very entrepreneurial. I mean, they gave you a piece of chalk and you had a blackboard, and they go, good luck. Once I got into the system in the United States, I found it very controlling and sort of hard to express anything. But I think management is so much teaching. I always think of myself as a teacher because I think that's what you do. You are bringing people together, talking, communicating very clearly about where you're going and how everybody fits in, and then you're creating this environment for working together and learning. So I don't really think that my early days as a teacher have been very applicable. They have been very applicable to what I've ended up doing, but I never really wanted to continue being a teacher. Now here I am back at the end of my career wanting to teach again. So I think that there's a lot of things that are related between teaching and management.
I could imagine. I remember another interview I did recently with an educator. She said the root word of education is educare, which means to draw out of. And it's the same thing in leadership. You're drawing out of the best from people. You can't force it into them or plant it. You've got to pull it out of them. I'm wondering, as you look back on your career, what was one of the proudest moments that you've had? A moment where you look back and say, you know, I did something really good here.
Well, there are a couple of things that I always think of them. Some of them are more personal and some of them are more business related. I'll talk about the personal one first. When I was at Nature Company, I mentioned to you that I really had a very strong passion for the environment, and it was the early days of the sort of green movement, and I just was something that was so important to me. And so once we, I started at Nature Company when there was one store and left when there were 120. So we were working hard. We were opening 20 to 25 stores a year and growing like crazy. But we got to this point where we were actually very, very successful financially, which is a wonderful thing. I always say it's much more fun to work for a company that makes money than doesn't make money. And we were at that position where we could actually take a lot of the things that had created the wealth for the shareholders and for the people that worked at the company and give back. And I was very instrumental in forming a relationship with the Nature Conservancy, which is one of the biggest nonprofit conservation organizations in the world. And we formed this relationship, and it was one of the first times profit and nonprofit got together, and we did incredible things together. We quadrupled their membership in the first year. We raised the awareness of the work they were doing. We actually got kids involved, and it was one of the sort of benchmarks for that kind of profit nonprofit working together to reach a goal. And that was my project. I loved it. I was so excited that I got to work on that, and I always remember that as being a really wonderful experience. I think, the other things are, just much more business related. When I went to Sur La Table, the company had lost money for 10 years. Wonderful brand, great people, wonderful product, but could not figure out how to make money. And in 1 year, we turned the company around. And this year, they're actually in a position to start thinking about doing an IPO, which is an initial public offer where you go out and sell stock. And so I feel really excited about that I built this foundation for this company, which has then turned into be a very, very successful business. And I think financially, people are going to get rewarded for a lot of the hard work that they did. So one was very personal, one was very business related, but they both are things that I feel very good about. I'm
tying it back to your saying you like to solve problems. So you go into Sur La Table, and you must have seen some problems.
Oh yeah.
What was your diagnosis that had you and that enabled you to make that turnaround?
I think all leadership is kind of you learn and then you move and learn. And one of the things that I wasn't happy about at Smith Hawkins was the same situation, company that wasn't making money, but I was young and I was so enthusiastic that I was afraid to make changes, and I moved very slowly, and consequently the company didn't make money until a couple years after I was there because I was so nervous about tinkering with anything. When I went to Sur La Table, I didn't have that fear anymore. I knew there were things that were broken. I could see them as clear as anything, and there were like 3 things I did there that I think would work for any business. Number one, I took the time at the very beginning to pull all the people around me who knew what the brand stood for, who understood who the customer was at Sur La Table, who knew what made it great, because it was a great company. It just wasn't a profitable company. And I really, institutionalized this brand map for the whole company. Everything from the mission statement to the vision to the brand attributes to the customer segmentation to the products, and I just laid out this very, very clear, not by myself, lots of involvement, lots of buy-in, and it made all the difference.
Yes.
Everybody knew where we were going, what we believed in, and what made the company great. Then I layered the second part of it, which is never the fun part of business, but has to be done, is I evaluated the team that I inherited from the previous leaders. And I had 13 vice presidents, and at the end of the day, I ended up with 2 of the original 13. And it wasn't because they were bad people, and it wasn't because they weren't working hard enough. They didn't have the experience to take the company to the next level. And I think when you work in small businesses, when you work in businesses where there are founders, oftentimes people are clinging to a set of values that have worked to that point,
Yes.
but are exactly what's not going to work to the next point.
Yes.
So once I very surgically got the right group of people in place, then I did one more thing, which is something else that I believe is absolutely fundamental to any good business, is I established this process for managing sales, margin, and expenses. Boring stuff, back of the house, but absolutely critical. So every single month, with religion, we would sit down, the management team,
Yes.
and we would have looked back at the month, and then we would forecast what was going to happen in the next month. And the combination of having this roadmap, which was the strategy and the vision that kept everybody pumped up and engaged and clear-headed about who we were and why we were happy to be at Sur La Table, with the right people at the table. And that's always the hardest part.
Yes.
Always the hardest part. Because not only do you get the right people at the table, but then you have to get them to work together.
You know, Jim, I think it's Jim Collins in the book Good to Great. He talks about getting the right people on the bus.
Yeah.
And it's the most crucial thing. You had a map for where you wanted to go, but the people in the company, at the time, most of them didn't fit the map.
Right. Well, I mean, we could go through characterizations of employees who are in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I call the obstructionist. That's the person who, we don't do things like that at Sur La Table, or we don't do things like that at Smith Hawkins. And,
Yeah.
you know, the reason I mentioned Smith Hawkins, when people said that at Smith Hawkins, I went, oh, okay, I guess I have to rethink this. When my gut and my intuition told me, no, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
When I got to Sur La Table, I was much clearer headed. I was a much stronger leader for the business than I had been earlier. And it was because I'd had that experience, and I knew that a lot of things had to be fixed. And problems don't fix themselves. And you probably know that in your personal life. If something's bugging you and you just let it, ferment in your brain, and then eventually you go, okay, I guess I have to deal with this.
Yeah.
Well, in business, I learned, move on, get it done, face your problems, and move as fast as you can. Move as fast as you're comfortable moving. And I felt like I was moving as fast as I could move at Sur La Table, whereas at Smith Hawkins, I felt like,
Yeah.
I was just I was too in awe of, I called it the temple of Smith Hawkins.
Well, and
It was
also
like a religion, kind of. It was like a cult almost. I was.
And was your first stint as a CEO.
Right, exactly.
I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of CEOs, particularly younger ones, for whom it's their first stint. And I started to coin this thing called CEO-itis. And if any of you become a CEO, you'll catch it. It's just inevitable, like catching a flu. You'll get it. And you got it. You got CEO-itis. And it's this flu symptom that your first time you don't want to blow it.
Yeah.
And you're going, oh boy, I get a chance to now cut my teeth on something, and this fear seizes you. But then you learn, you didn't. It's like getting mono. You can't get it a second time.
Well, I think there's some fundamental tenets about leadership that translate across all companies. And for me, it's like, what are the core values of the company? What is the culture? Who is the customer? I'm a very big customer person. I'm a marketing person, kind of because I like marketing the best. And so I always start with the customer, like, who loves us? And who really has been loyal to this company? And once you kind of figure out who the customer is, and you know where you want to get more customers, then you put the roadmap together, and then you can move.
Yeah.
But until you really do that hard work of which is what I like the best, which is the strategy, where you sit down and you think about strategically mapping out, you know, who we are, how we compete, who are we competing with, what are the external factors for success, and then you go.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's something that I wasn't that comfortable with at Smith & Hawkins, but I think there was another reason. I mean, mainly you've hit it on the head. I didn't know what I was doing.
I didn't want to say it that way,
but there are certain brands that are so reverential. You know, I mean, just think about the person that has to follow Steve Jobs. You know, there are these founder-based companies, and Paul Hawken, I don't know if any of you have read anything that he's written or know of him. He lives in Sausalito. He is a absolute genius at. He's a brilliant man, and he is incredibly engaging. And he basically used the company to, and he should. I mean, it was his company to express his personality.
Yes.
And once he was gone, there was this huge responsibility to fill the shoes of somebody that was so smart and so famous.
Yeah.
You know, and I think I just didn't have the confidence for probably a year or two to say, you know what, fundamentally this is broken and we got to fix it. I don't care if it's Smith & Hawkins. You know, you can't run a business like this. Yeah. And I think as young business students and as you know, potential leaders, I mean, there are a few things that you'll learn, and you know, hopefully your teachers can help you learn them quickly, is that they don't go away. You need good people. You need to know everybody needs to know where they're going.
Yes. And
you need to know how you're going to make money.
I want to double click on this. Everybody needs to know where you're going. The leaders that I continue to meet, that was one of the themes that showed up every single time. Almost every leader had an image of where they're going, and it was more than just this vision, more than a little pithy phrase, which is good. Good to have a big, wonderful, glowing vision, but having in their mind mapped out what are the key pieces early on? What are the pieces later? Who needs to be on the bus? How does this relate to that? What is our fundamental strategy? How does that connect to how we're going to make money? When you say had it mapped out, I'm imagining stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely. No, I think that you know, it's a combination of leveraging what's working and what I call assets. All businesses have assets, hard assets that you can touch. Balance sheet kind of stuff that you guys probably are learning about, but then there's these things that are qualitative, things that count that you can't count. And I think as a leader, the sooner you understand what those things are, what are those qualitative aspects to this business that make it work, the rest of it is kind of more 101 stuff. I mean, you know, I think I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but truthfully, it's not that hard. It's not that hard to run a good business if you're willing to make the hard decisions, and like we've talked about over and over again, number one, if you get the right group of people to work with. Yeah. And they work as a team. Yeah. You can have brilliant people sitting at a table and they don't want to work together. You guys are going to get to try this out with your boats, right? There'll probably be 3 geniuses, but somebody's going to have to say, this is the design, we're out of time. And one of the metaphors I use all the time, and because I'm a very visual person, meetings. You know how many meetings you go to in business? I mean, you spend a lot of time talking to each other. And I call them circles and lines. They're line meetings where you're just there tactically to check in. We said we were going to do this. Did this happen? You know, why didn't it? Okay, how do we make it happen? And that's what I call these end-of-month financial review meetings. But the circle meetings to me are much more interesting because those are the ones where you're going around. This is your boat experience. You're going around, okay, we got to make a boat. Who has an idea? Who has and you're going around, and there's no wrong answers. I always say there's no wrong answers when you're in the circle. The job of the CEO is to say, stop. That is as good an idea as we're going to get. We're going on a line now. We're going to get the cardboard. We're going to get the duct tape. We're going to make this boat. We're going to test it. We're going to, you know, and I think that for me, I love the circles because I'm a creative person, basically, a marketing person, and there's no bad ideas in marketing. There's just better ideas. But as a CEO and a leader, you have to be willing to say, you know what, we could just keep going around this circle all day and it's not going to work. We're not going to have a boat built.
Yeah.
And there's deadlines and there's money. And so I think it's the combination of using your right side of your brain, that creative side that taps into sort of how people work together and what are good ideas and all the good things. And then there's the other side that, okay, we got to put the pedal to the metal here, get something done and go.
Well, and both are needed. Both
Absolutely.
are required. If you have too much of the authoritative, we're going here no matter what.
Nobody follows you.
Where they are.
I'm here by myself.
If you have too much of the circle. So the capacity to know when. It's almost like you can think about it as divergence and then convergence.
Absolutely.
So the divergence is, let's get the ideas out on the table, let's explore them, let's get us engaged. And then at some point, somebody's got to bring those ideas into convergence and then have enough inner authority to say, we're going.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, certain big problems take more circle time. I mean, if you're really trying to redesign a new store, let's say, you know, that's not going to happen in one meeting. There's a whole bunch of, okay, let's get the architect. Okay, and so I think the thing with circles is you don't want to start where you started the first time. You want to start where you ended. Because a lot of companies get caught up in that kind of love to hear themselves talk. So I think the role of the leader is really to say, okay, here's what we discussed. We need more discussion on this now. Okay. Yeah. And you know what? It's intuitive. You don't know. There's no, you know, playbook that they give you to say, okay, you spend 45 minutes discussing this. I think that's the natural kind of leadership quality that you either have or you don't have.
Yes. Yes, it's a feel. I'm reminded of the movie Dances with Wolves.
Yes.
There's the Native Americans were sitting around the table, and the Kevin Costner character had shown up in their world, and the Native Americans were going, well, what the heck do we do with this guy, this white guy who just showed up? And the way they talked about it was kind of interesting. It was first a circle and then a line, and the circle was the chief gathered the other advisors, and the question was, what do we do about this Kevin Costner guy? And so one person would say, well, danger, bad, this is trouble, kill him immediately. And then the other Native American would say, well, I don't know, maybe we got something to learn from this person, so let's learn from them and then kill him. You know, and then the third one would say, well, maybe we can befriend him. Maybe there's a way of bringing him in. And the chief just kind of listened and listened and took it all in. And then at some point, the chief just said, okay, here's what we're going to do.
Yep. That's
and they all just kind of flowed right in. But it couldn't have happened without some of that give and take.
It sort of made me think of two things. One, when you get your circles together, like with your boats, you know, you all have different talents, I'm sure. Some of you are very analytical, probably. Some of you are more creative. And you have to make sure that you trust the right person to make the right decision. So the example I'm going to use is store design.
Yeah.
You don't want the store operation person in the meeting to say, where do the trucks drive up to the back door, before you haven't even figured out conceptually what this customer experience is going to be with, because it takes everybody down to a very tactical level. So it's that balance between having people who complement each other with different abilities and different talents, and then listening to the right people at the right time, I think is really huge.
Yeah.
And again, these are the sort of softer sides of being a leader, but for me, they're the most fun.
It's the art of leadership. I asked you the proudest moment, and I want to go to the other side. Has there been a time, can you remember a time when you were looking in the mirror as a leader and you didn't like what you saw?
Well, I think that's sort of strong words.
That is strong,
you don't feel so good about what you did, maybe more.
Yeah.
And I think a general statement for me is always the people stuff. It's always the hardest. I mean, when I've gone through what they call RIFs, which are, I can't remember what it means now, but it's reduction in forces, which is basically like terminate a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Because, you know, either you got the wrong people or you're not making money or something. Those things are so
We're going to right-size the business.
Oh, yeah, right. Whatever the lingo is. It's so difficult to do that with dignity and have people feel valued, and they're hard. And I got much better at it. I have to tell you, I actually think that I can do it now, but I couldn't always do it, trust me. And so all the people stuff, when I really cringe and think about, ooh, it's either when I hired somebody who I was just not the right person, and then I had to terminate them, and it was so painful because I felt like I had set them up for failure in a little bit. But, you know, it's just, all that people stuff is always really, really challenging. But I'll tell you kind of a funnier story, which goes back to Smith Hawkins. I told you when I went there, I was just kind of like in awe of this thing that had been created, and I was a very good customer of theirs. And I used to go over to the store in Mill Valley where they had this beautiful nursery, but there were rules about what you could sell. We didn't sell yellow flowers. I mean, that's just one example. We didn't sell annuals. You know, annuals are things like petunias that you plant every year. We only sold perennials in hues of purple and lavender and white. It was a very rigid, but it worked. It was our brand. And so I went into the company, and we had this company garden, which I thought was great, because I wanted people to get their hands in the dirt. But it was complete hodgepodge of, you know, no vision, no brand extension. And so I was talking to one person who I probably should have talked to more than one person. Anyway, long story, I ended up ripping the whole garden out and putting a whole new garden in that was very on brand and very Smith & Hawkins, and it was a horrible mistake. I mean, people, the employees were so upset. I mean, you look back in hindsight, and I was so enamored with the brand that I lost sight of the fact that this was people who had built this garden. And in fact, the ridiculous part of it is our tagline was "Every garden counts." So I had basically...
Except this one.
Yeah,
right.
I don't like this garden. No, I had made a huge blunder. It actually turned out to be good for me because I had to, you know, apologize. I had to sit down with the employees. We eventually made a peace treaty and moved on and had both gardens. We kind of created special plots for people who could do whatever they want. And then we had this very formal sort of brand extension where we had meetings and took our vendors and all that. So it worked out in the end, but it was a horrible moment, I can tell you. I felt like, I just, you know, I think that the lesson I took away from that, which is when you have to make really emotionally charged decisions, and you do, things that have to do with people usually, or something that has been what I call sacred cow in the company. You know what sacred cows are in India? Anybody? No? You don't know what sacred cows are?
You've heard the term, I imagine.
What's a sacred cow?
They're off limits because it's part of their religion.
Yeah, they just wander down the streets and nobody touches them. And so in business, you always have sacred cows. You know, you go, oh, we don't do that here. I mean, I'm sure Dominican has sacred cows. But whenever you're dealing with changing something that has been either historically important to the company or something that is very emotionally charged for some reason, take your time.
Yeah.
Communicate. Tell people why you want to change. Get feedback. Move more slowly. So while I'm a big proponent of moving fast, because I just think that some things aren't worth spending a lot of time on, there are things that you have to spend time on it. And usually they're those things where they're real fundamental changes to the business, real fundamental changes to the way people behave in the business or think about how they fit into the business. And ripping out the garden
was one of them.
Was not a good thing.
And I would say, and you may not have taken this away, but I would say that you were able to apologize.
Yeah,
was huge, because you're going to make mistakes. There's no way you can take risks without make mistakes. You're just going to make them. But I think some leaders, they're afraid to say, I'm sorry I blew it.
Right.
When everybody knows they blew it, and there's something about the I'm sorry that goes far, I think, for people.
The other mistake I made, which when you asked me that question, I was trying to think back, and oh my God, I think I blocked out everything bad. It's all wonderful. It was when I was a consultant, and I was actually paid to fly around the world by Procter & Gamble to go. I started in Cincinnati, where their headquarters are, and I did this brand presentation for them that somebody had seen it at a conference I'd spoken at, and they'd invited me to go to all their offices. And so I went from Cincinnati to London to Osaka, and we had heard there was some business to be developed in Osaka. So number one, I was giving the brand presentation, but then the next day I was going to kind of hit him up for some business. And, you know, I flew around the world. I'm sound asleep. 6 a.m., the phone rings, and it's my assistant calling from San Francisco, and she says, I have something horrible to tell you. And I'm like, what? She goes, we spelled Procter & Gamble wrong in every single document.
Oh, my God.
And I was like, I went crazy.
Yeah. I
went nuts. I'm going to write it off to jet lag, but no, I went so crazy on this poor young woman. And I just don't think there's a place for real anger in business. It never gets you to where you want to go. It terrifies everybody. You know, you can like yell your head off and you feel good for like 1 minute. Everybody's cowering. And then you still have to deal with the problem.
Yes.
So I went nuts on this young girl. She was very wonderful. We're still very good friends, and she's turned out to be somebody that I've mentored and is very, very successful. But it was not, you know, the lesson there is use anger very, very, in a very limited way. I mean, there are bosses that's all they do. They scream and yell. Bill Gates, have you ever seen any of the YouTube things with Steve Ballmer? Oh my God, they're hilarious. I mean, he just screams and yells and rants, and that's the culture at Microsoft.
That got started.
They yell at each other all day long. They do, and I just don't think it gets you the kind of people you want. I don't think it gets you I mean, they've been very successful, but not so much recently.
Not because of it.
Not because of that.
No,
right.
they're successful.
So I guess my lesson to you guys is, you know, you're going to get angry. Things will make you really frustrated. Sometimes it's justifiable. Like I was totally justified. Spelling Procter & Gamble wrong in a presentation to Procter & Gamble kind of qualifies as off with your head, but
yeah,
it doesn't help.
It doesn't do anything, and I'm sure she felt terrible anyway.
Oh, she felt horrible.
Yeah.
And I only dumped on
So I'm going to ask you one more question. Then I want you all to know we're going to bring you in just a couple minutes. And will there be a mic that they can use like we did before?
Yes, right here.
Okay, good. So I want you to start thinking about what questions that you have, either based on what you've heard or what's coming to mind for you. It's a rare opportunity to sit in front of someone this experienced and this willing to just kind of say, here's what I'm doing. Here's what I've learned along the way. So my question to you, and then we'll bring them in. I think every leader, in part, it's about leaving a legacy. You leave a wake behind you. And if you could kind of connect the dots of your life as a leader, what legacy do you sense you may be leaving behind, if at all?
Well, for me, it's always been about the people. I mean, it starts out with my desire to be a teacher, but not liking the institution of education that much when I was young. It wasn't fast enough for me. It was too bureaucratic. But I think that my legacy is definitely going to be the fact that I've been able to attract, hire, retain, and reward really good people and create teams that work together. I mean, it's why Sur La Table is in the position to do an IPO. Every single person on the management team I hired, and I feel really good about that. I've also, like the young woman, the Procter & Gamble, I mean, I mentor a lot of people. I get calls every week from somebody that worked for me and asking advice, and I love that aspect of business, and I think that's definitely one thing. The other thing that I particularly love and is managing brands. I mean, I talked about brand as asset, and so the metaphor I use is you get this wonderful brand, Sur La Table, Smith Hawkins, Nature Company, whatever the company is that you're working for, assuming that you have a connection to the brand, and I highly recommend that be something that you look for in your future, is that you have to figure out how to keep the brand. The brand needs to be nurtured just like people. It's my theory. You need to be able to watch that brand grow as the company grows. You can't keep it like in this little tabernacle.
Yes.
It's something that's alive.
Yes. And
the more people you bring into the company, the more they influence it. And for me, it's always important to see the brand at, wherever the end line is, and let's just say it's an IPO at Sur La Table. I think it's really important to have strong brands. I think there are two things that you can count. One is the actual bottom line, and the other is the brand reach. Yeah. And if you look at companies, I mean, this is a fun exercise to do with people like you, is say, you know, tell me a brand you love. Tell me a brand you relate to. And I'll guarantee you that it's a holistic brand.
Yes.
It's a brand that not only is like, you know, sexy and sizzly in their marketing, but that when you get in that BMW and you drive it, it delivers on that brand promise. And I love that kind of circle to thinking about brands. I always want the brand to be better when I leave a company than when I started. And I think, so it's a combination of those two things that I hope are my legacy.
So I'm going to shine a little bit of light on Kathy here for a moment. Can you see the balance in her? Can you see money on the one hand, people on the other, and they're both connected? The circle and the line? I mean, I think as I listen to you, I'm seeing somebody who's not thought about leadership in a unilateral, unidimensional way. But the art of leadership, for me, has something to do with maturity. And balance and maturity go hand in hand. I see so many people, they get very, this is it, one-dimensional, this is what you must do. And you're offering a much more multi-dimensional, multi-contoured view of a leader. And I don't know that you've thought about your life that way, but that's how I hear it when I listen to you.
I think about my brain more than that. I always know when I'm tapping into the right or the left. And I think to really be comfortable as a leader, you have to be comfortable with both sides of your brain. Now, having said that, the first person I hire every time I go somewhere is a CFO. The good news about business, it's 5th grade math. It's all percentages. It's all pie charts and
Where's
percentages.
Our
you never
in the
use
room?
calculus in
There
business.
she is.
And so I was really happy because I was pretty good at 5th grade math. It was when you got into higher math that I was like horrible.
Yeah.
But I know enough. I mean, I think two things, all kidding aside, is one, you got to be comfortable going there with both sides. You have to be comfortable reading things and understanding what numbers tell you. Numbers are just numbers. You can make numbers into anything, as we know from like Enron and Citibank and everybody. I mean, the numbers are just there as like little guideposts along the map. But I think being comfortable with both sides of your brain is really important. And then you said this in your book, knowing what you're not good at is as important as knowing what you're good at. If you're not good at something, for goodness sakes, go find the best person that you can find to compliment you, because that's what makes it more fun. That's what makes business fun, is really teamwork.
Yeah.
It's like being kids again. It's really, really fun to run a business and to be a part of a business that's growing and successful. But it's not fun, in my mind, and I think you would agree with me from what I've read, you know, this kind of despot way of managing this, like, you know, nobody knows anything but me, my way or the highway. That's stressful. Then you have to know everything.
I don't think it's sustainable.
Yeah.
I just don't think it is.
No.
I think if you're in a crisis for a short moment, you can command people to do things. But then over time, they just shrivel.
Yeah,
It's just not sustainable.
Well, and I think, you know, we've all been, there's just too much information running around our brains, you know. That's a line from probably somebody, Sting or
Some
something.
movie, there ought to be a good line there somewhere.
And I think we are overloaded with information now. I mean, that's one of the hardest parts about running a business right now, is you get so much information. I mean, you have 130 emails a day. And so you have to be able to kind of clear the way, just clear the noise, shut things down. Don't listen to things that aren't important. And listen to the people who have the best answers. I had a great opportunity to go to Harvard. When I was at the Nature Company, they sent me back there for one of these executive programs. And the thing that I took away from there, and they teach all by case studies. So you just read these case studies over and over again. Finally you go, I get it. And one of the main lessons I took away from that was, who's the best person in any company to make the decision? Sometimes it's the CEO, sometimes it's the people out running the stores.
But the wisdom
sometimes
to know.
It's the CFO, sometimes it's the creative guy. You don't have to make every decision. No. You just have to know who do you want to listen to and trust to help you make that decision? And that's what's fun.
Yeah.
I think it'd be pretty terrifying to be, what is it, command and charge? There's a name for that kind of leader.
Command and control.
Command and control, you know, I don't know. I mean, I think there are businesses that work that way, but not where I want to work.
And it doesn't fit you. Yeah.
Doesn't fit me.
So here's what I'd like you to do. Would you all, we're going to bring you into this now. I'd like you to grab 2 other people. So form roughly groups of 3 and take 5 minutes. And I'd like you all to agree as a team, what's the 1 or 2 questions that the 3 of you feel are the most important questions to ask Kathy? Will you do that for me?
Or you.
Or me. But she's the star for today. So grab 2 other people, and you need to agree what's a good question to ask.
I can hear you.
Okay. So earlier you mentioned about the young people in business and how they want to become that CEO very fast, very quick. And we talked about it, and we noticed that that's what we want too sometimes, and we have to look back at ourselves and like, oh, okay, wait, we're not going to be that this fast. And obviously you didn't start as a CEO, but we have dreams and aspirations. However, we're still young, and we want to know how to stay humble and how to put our foot in the door, how to get on that right direction to doing what we want to achieve and what we dream of. Because we all have jobs, and we said not to sound cocky that they're not below us, but they're not where we want to go.
Right. Yes.
And we're still young, and we want people to take us serious. But you know, how did you start off, basically?
Well, it's interesting. The same woman that, I'll just give you a little bit of a side story here. The woman, the famous Procter & Gamble scene, she actually was my assistant, and she graduated from Haas Business School, undergraduate, very bright young woman, and she was like, I want to be a CEO. I was like, Diana, you're a waitress. Be the best waitress you can be, and you'll get discovered. And I really honestly think that when I look back on what made me successful was 3 things. 1, every job I ever had, I did really well. Whether it was I started out running the call center for a catalog, which is not a pretty job. I mean, you're basically trying to get people there to talk to customers. I just did a really good job with everything, and you get noticed. It's amazing. If you do, it's like in class. You get noticed if you're a good student, don't you? It's the same thing in business. So just be excellent at what you do. And that's the present. You got to be present in doing that. I think secondly, which is the thing I said, is raise your hand. Be curious. I think that, and I don't think the time is the same for you at all. In fact, I think it's a quite challenging time to be in business right now. Although, not so. I mean, there's a lot of other things that are going on. You have to be curious enough to learn other things besides what your comfort level is. A little bit of fearlessness, a little bit throwing yourself out there and trying things that are maybe a little bit challenging for you. And I mean, like I told you, I didn't have any idea what unions were like. This is at the Nature Company. I had to lead this distribution center through this union bid. I learned so much about distribution, and that was scary for me. I mean, I was a young person then. So I think it's a combination of excellence in the present, what you're doing. You are, whoever you are right this minute, do your best job. You'll get noticed. Don't worry about that. Every business notices star performers, trust me. When we do these riffs, we don't go around and do it without knowing who is good. Or when you reward people, or when there's bonuses to give out, you know who the star performers are. Secondly, be curious, raise your hand, try some things, and there's a little bit of fear involved in it. But you know, what's the worst thing? You'll learn a lot. I mean, I did things that I wasn't always successful at everything. Trust me, there are things that I did that probably shouldn't have done at the time. But I think you learn from the mistakes as much as you do from the successes.
And I want to just add something. I completely support what you're saying. And the thing that I didn't know when I was young is that it would happen naturally.
Yes.
And when you're young, you want to make it happen. And the make it happen energy is part of what will work, but you can't force it. If you do a great job and you work your butt off and care about the quality, over time that attitude will get you there very naturally when you're ready.
Yeah, I mean, back to Diana is this woman's name. So she was my assistant. I said, you need to, she wanted to be in retail. I said, you need to go get a job in retail. They're not going to hire you as a vice president. I'm sorry to tell you. So she went out and she worked at Walmart.com, and she was an inventory manager. Not a sexy job. You're on a computer all day. She then did such a good job, they let her start buying things. And then she got to go back to Bentonville. Well, it just so happens the corporate jet was flying back to San Francisco. She rides on the corporate jet with the CEO of Walmart. She's engaged, she's talking. He goes, would you like to come back and run our environmental group? She goes back there. Next thing, she applies for graduate school. She calls me, she says, I need some advice. I go, okay, what? She goes, well, I got into Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, Yale, Chicago. Where do you think I should go? I'm like, well, I think you should look at Harvard and Stanford and decide what you want to do with your life. You know, do you want to work on the West Coast? So in other words, she had great energy. She made mistakes. She was ahead of herself a lot of time, but she was so dedicated to helping me and to being a good support system for me that, you know, it just led her to the next thing. She didn't know she was going to end up, you know, at Walmart.com back in Bentonville working for a year. It just all happens. And you know, you kind of got to trust a little bit that it will. Yeah. And it will.
Great.
So my fabulous group would like to ask, considering the experiences that you have gathered throughout the years, if you could go back and talk to the child you, or you as a child, what would you say to yourself?
Wow.
Very interesting.
That's
question.
a great question. Did you all hear that?
20 years ago.
Yeah.
If she can talk to the child that she was, what would she say to that child now? About leadership
Well,
and about...
I think it's interesting because I grew up before Title IX. You know, girls did girl things, and I was always a tomboy, and I always liked activities and things like that. And I think playing with boys when I was a little girl, it really taught me a very finely honed sense of competition. Yeah. I didn't know that. I just liked it. I liked roughhouse. I liked playing touch football after school. I liked all the stuff and I remember thinking, boys have a lot more fun. But those were the days. Now it's not true. So for me, that child was kind of hemmed in a little bit because I happened to be born a girl. But it gets back to my father and my upbringing. It was, you know, I never felt like that I was treated differently from a, you know, sort of talent perspective because of that. But then as you get into business, for me, I mean, I was always the only woman in the room for like the first 20 years of business. It was just the time. And so having that early childhood experience of having to like fight for what you wanted, it stood me very well. I didn't know it at the time. Yeah. I didn't know it at the time, but I think that it's been pointed out to me many times. How did you get so tough?
It sounds like what you might say to the young child in you is just a lot of encouragement.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Just keep going for it. Yeah. Another question.
Listen to your heart, I think.
Yeah. Another question.
What's the most beneficial way to work with people who may not like you or you may not get along with, all the while staying a balanced and strong leader?
Working with people that you don't really get along with.
What's the best way of working with people you don't get along with?
Or who don't like you.
But still remain a balanced leader?
Well, I mean, I think it's, there's what I call substance and style, okay? We all have substance, we all have style. I mean, I think you talk about personality and core. I mean, they're all the same words. And so I can deal with style issues because I think everybody has a different style. We all grew up in different ways. We were all treated different, you know, ways in our life. And so style things are not that important to me as long as they don't get in the way of getting things done. Substance is what I always look for. And so if I don't really like working with somebody, I can do it if I think they bring value to the company and add value to the team. And you always like some people better. I mean, it's just the way it is. We all have friends. We choose to work with things. I think the thing you don't want to do is hire people like yourself. You don't want to surround yourself with people who number one, have your same skill sets, but who are just kind of, tell you what you want to hear. I think it's important to have people that are stylistically different. What you don't want is obstructionists and people who, their ego is out of control. I mean, there are certain toxic kinds of personalities in business. I mean, you guys see them, I'm sure, in life. That is not okay with me. So if I think somebody is actually doing harm to the organization or to other people, I don't put up with it.
Yeah. So to me, I have the same line. If I don't like them, that's irrelevant in many ways.
Style.
In fact, it may be welcome, but if they cross a line and they're not behaving consistent with our values, then it's not okay.
I mean, another example I'll give you is I hired this guy, and he had all the credentials. This is IT, another thing I hire for, and he had the resume from heaven, and everything he did was relevant to what we were doing. He was so difficult to work with, but he wasn't difficult for me. He was difficult for everybody. And I put up with him for about 2 years, and finally I called him in my office. I go, "You're getting voted off the island. You are, nobody likes working with you." And it was this huge shock to him. He absolutely did not know that. And I went, "You don't get that you're like sandpaper? That when you walk in the room, everybody just loses the air, sucked out?"
Yeah.
And so sometimes people just don't have self-awareness. And if you're a leader and you can kind of say, "Come over here, let's sit down." And if they're really important, and again, back to what you were saying, if there's a substance there that's worth it, you can get them coaching and counseling and all kinds of stuff. But if everybody doesn't get along with them, it's usually a good sign that it's just a cultural misfit, and they're not going to work out. And eventually I sort of shoved the guy off the island, and the next guy was perfect.
Yeah.
Had the same credentials, and everybody liked working with him.
I love your comment about homogeneity, because if they're all like you, then it's pretty redundant, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not very useful. It's the differences that start to create the magic.
Well, I think it's a sign of a very young person, too, when you hire,
in your own
who
image.
you're comfortable with, rather than have a vision of how the team's going to work together. That's definitely, I was guilty of that in the early days.
Sure. Me
but
too.
you learn pretty fast.
Me too, yeah. One or two more. Who's got a question you want to ask?
Getting your foot in the door, it scares, it worries me in a sense, just because number one, we don't know how when it's going to happen. We know in the future that we all hope to be successful. We all hope to represent ourselves in a manner to separate ourselves from others, but it's like a gap that needs to be bridged somehow.
Yep.
Yeah.
So how do you go from being an educated person with a degree to conveying that message to other companies also?
And I think, I'm just going to be honest with you,
Yeah.
some of it's dumb luck, honestly, and timing, just being in the right place at the right time, but a lot of it is networking. I know that Denise and Chris talk a lot about that with you, and that how important it is. And networking can be from the most unlikely place. You could be sitting next to somebody on an airplane. It can be, your cousin marries somebody. I mean, it isn't like as clear cut as I think you would maybe like it to be, that there's just this whole network out there, and if I just get business cards printed and hand them out, and it'll all come together. I think you just have to be. It goes back to what I said. You have to be incredibly curious about what people do. Talk to people. You're in all kinds of different social situations. Don't take any relationship for granted. And you don't have to be overpowering and overbearing by any means. You have to be true to yourself. But I think networking, and I'll tell you, I didn't understand. I was too busy working all the time. And then eventually I go, oh, that's what you're supposed to do. Save business cards, call people. But, I honestly will tell you, I think this is a challenging time. I know you know that, but it's not an impossible time. When I got my first job at the Nature Company, it was because I was in the Peace Corps. And the guy who founded the company had been a Peace Corps volunteer. I met another Peace Corps volunteer. He said, "You'll love this guy. Let's go over to dinner." He was hiring somebody. I took the job. It was not what I thought I wanted to do, and voila. I mean, I worked there for 13 years. That's where I got, sort of my MBA was from all those. I never thought the Peace Corps was going to lead me to be a CEO, but that's how life is. Yeah. So just keep your ears open and your eyes open and be curious and network like crazy.
So we'll keep with the question. What scares you or concerns you the most?
I would have to say what scares me the most is failing, not getting that job that you wanted, your first real job, not getting that, because there's a lot of people out there getting it, applying for the same job for you. So basically just failing at what you really wanted to in the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, it may take a few tries before you get to where you want to go, but it goes back to what I said before. As long as you're willing to put in the time to do what you're doing really well, as meaningless as the job is, the dots will get connected for you. I think what I really don't like to see in young people is, waiting to be discovered. That's why I always use the waitress who wants to be the actress. I'm really an actress. I only am a waitress because that's how I make money. Fact is, if you're great at what you're doing, it'll lead you, And you may have a few setbacks and failures, trust me. It doesn't always work out quite as smoothly as we'd like. And I just have to be really fortunate. I don't think that, I've had a pretty smooth ride of it, but it was a very different time too. I mean, everything was growing. It was the, sort of boom years. We'll come out of this. I think we're already coming out of this recession. I think your time will come. You guys got to know technology too. You just cannot, you cannot not know it. You got to know how people communicate is, virtually now, and you've got to learn how to use that and how not to use it. Like not putting crazy things on Facebook, right? All that stuff. Don't do that.
That word failure is such a loaded word. As soon as you have it in your mind that if you didn't get a job, it's a failure, notice what happens in your body. I mean, your body just slinks, you get low, you feel defeated. I think it's a loaded word. I got to tell you, I have been fired, I've been laid off, I've missed so many opportunities in my career. If I left those moments and had the image of failure, I'm not going to go back again. If you see those as just natural steps, and in fact, which is worse? Having that setback where you went for it and you failed, or not going for it in the first place. The error of omission is far greater than the error of commission in the world of business. And every single CEO you will ever meet will tell you 10 times over the number of times they failed, but they didn't see it that way. Maybe in a moment they had to lick their wounds.
I don't even remember them.
but your ability to just come back and go for it, that's what defines you, not the failures.
Yeah.
It's too loaded.
I mean, the other thing that if you really want to be the CEO or president or the leader of a company, I just had this interesting experience where I had to replace myself at Sur La Table because I live in California, my husband lives here, we're in the wine business. I mean, I always knew I wasn't going to stay there forever, so we started doing a search for my replacement. We hired this very expensive executive search firm in New York City, and I probably interviewed 12 people, and they were so one-dimensional. They had gone in, they had made a ton of money early on as a young person, and they had just stuck with it, whether it was finance or merchandising. And that's where I really encourage, if you seriously want to run an organization sometime, you got to do a bunch of different things. You can't, I shouldn't say you can't. It's unlikely that you will be picked out of a crowd to run a business if you are strictly a CFO or if you are strictly a marketing person or whatever. You've got to push the boundaries to your comfort level a little bit And that means naturally you probably will have some setbacks and some failures.
By definition.
But it's the only way to really get into a position I think that you want, which is running a business, which there's nothing more fun.
Dr. Lucy, you had your hand up.
So as our students have this opportunity of higher education at a private independent institution where every minute, costs them something, as they get closer toward their junior and senior years, because our students, some of these students in the class here will be juniors next year, what skills should they be seeking to study in the classroom that will then need to be practiced?
I'm probably not the right person to answer that since I majored in English literature and never thought about business at all. But, I mean, this is sort of the answer that you've probably heard lots of people say, but I completely believe it, and I don't care if you go to Harvard or Stanford or Dominican or junior college or wherever, is critical thinking skills. You just need to know how to solve problems. So whatever tweaks your brain, whatever gets your brain firing on things, and it may be math, it may be science, it may be English, it may be something else, it may be marketing. You just have to be willing to engage your brain in thinking. I'll tell you one last story because I know it's late here. Same sabbatical. See how much I learned when I was on sabbatical? So I'm hiking in the Himalayas, and I don't know if any of you have done long treks. Has anybody done a long trek? You have a lot of downtime. I mean, you're walking 8 hours a day all by yourself. And you just, after a while, your brain just starts to go into this kind of almost like alpha waves or something where you're just so relaxed. And one of the things occurred to me so clearly, because it had been after my 7-year stint, 13 years at Nature Company, no break, 7 years, so 20 basic years of heavy lifting. I realized I couldn't think anymore. I was really good at reacting. And I think that's what I'm always looking for in good, hires, is people who really aren't afraid to think. Because you have to react. Things come at you at a mighty pace, and you got to set priorities and balance them. But if you can actually sit down and think, and you are in the position now where you should be doing that, don't forget how to think. I think that's what I would say to you. So I didn't major in business, so I'm probably not the best person, but you might.
I didn't either. I didn't either. And think for yourself. I want to add that. Think for yourself. Think it through for yourself. The teachers, you can teach as much as you can teach, but ultimately it's the person who faces a problem and figures it out for themselves and or with a team, not because somebody told them how to think, but they thought it through. That's the person that's going to shine.
And you will value this time so much. When you get out there in the working world, you're going to go, oh, such a luxury to listen to people talk and people who helped me. And I think take that seriously, because that will stand you well as you go out into business. Is, whatever you can learn. This is just a preparation for, working. And I think if you really engage yourself in learning whatever it is that gets you excited, you'll be wonderful.
Our freshman class has been reading the Week magazine. My question for you is, why or is the news an important thing to know as a CEO?
Well, I mean, I think it's such a simple question or answer for me. I mean, we live in such a global society. I say, you know what, we wanted to be global. Guess what? We are. Whether you like it or not, you're competing with people in China, India, everywhere, Europe, England, South America. So I think it's really important to know what the strengths and weaknesses are of competition. I mean, competition is a big part of business. Whenever I do a business plan, you have to start with, who am I competing with? You are in a global world. It's cool, it's wonderful, it's exciting, but it's also kind of scary. And I think it's really, you need to know what's going on. I've been spending a lot of time in China recently because my son's working over there. He works for Autodesk, and he's raised his hand, went over there for 2 years. Very scary thing to do, considering, all the adjustments. But There is an energy in China right now that is amazing.
Yes.
And the young people there are so excited about the future and life. And so you need to know that. You need to know what's coming at you, and you need to know that there's opportunities for you in other countries as well. So I think it's very important to read The Economist or whatever you like to read, or Google News, whatever.
Even if it's the first 2 paragraphs and not the whole article, what is strategy? Strategy is the ability to navigate in a world that's changing around you. If you don't know what's going on, how do you navigate? You end up navigated with your blinders on, you won't be successful. Y'all are great.
Yeah, it was good.
I'm going to hang around. Are you going to hang around?
I can hang for a few minutes.
We're going to hang around. Thank you all for taking the time and letting us in.